done, right? He's done surprisingly well, right? And it sort of dispels the notion, right, that, and both the left and right sort of believe this, especially the alt-right and the traditional left, that demographics is destiny, right? That as America gets more diverse, right, the Democrats are automatically going to be competitive in these states like Texas,
Yeah.
right? Or they're automatically always going to capture Florida, right? Or they're going to have, these like huge advantages.
It was the
But, like,
demographics that failed them this time.
yeah, like demographics is not destiny. The Republicans can still be competitive, even after everything they've done, right? They can still be competitive with minorities, right? So it's interesting to think about. Like the Democrats really need to up their messaging if they want to win, I think.
Yeah, I don't know if they're gonna like up their messaging in that area. I think that's what they're headed for is a much more kind of like regional cultural party. And honestly, I don't think the Republicans are going to be all the way like the sudden these like fighters for the forgotten man. They're culturally are going to hit all these kind of notes, but I do largely think that like when it comes to the real like economically disadvantaged people, they're not going to be able to participate in politics. Like they're not going to have a home. They're not going to have people who are kind of fighting for them on any like real materialistic aspect, because I think a lot of that stuff is just going to be completely gone from the picture, and we're going to see just more kind of attempts at that, more kind of like grasp at that from people who are kind of like the Marco Rubios and the Josh Hawleys of the world, but there is no place in politics for really changing the system.
If I had to make a bet right now about who would be sort of the 2024 nominee among the Republicans, I'm willing to bet that it's not going to be Marco Rubio, of course.
Right? I would probably say I bet it'd be Donald Trump.
I think it's Josh Hawley, or if Trump chooses to again, maybe.
I bet it'd be Donald Trump.
It's the hold that Trump has over the party is the craziest shit I've ever seen. Right, with him just straight up lying about this election.
He could very
fraud.
Single-handedly like defund
said,
Fox News pretty much at the way he's going.
He could
if
shoot
he wants
someone right in Fifth Avenue, right, and he'd be okay. Like he's said this himself, and it's so true.
It's very true.
Like it's shocking that he has such a hold over the base of the Republican Party. Like I'm pretty sure like most of the people in the Senate, right, most of the Republican intellectuals, conservative, like they know, right, this is bullshit, right? But it's just the downstream effect is so strong on the party base, right? No one wants to say anything. Like, Ben Shapiro, right? Initially when Trump, claimed victory on election night, he was sort of like on Twitter pushing back against that, right? But then you saw that he just got completely shat on by so many conservatives, right? Because the voter fraud narrative is just so strong.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see like what happens with that. Like what happens with that narrative? Are they going to be able, like, will it be some sort of like Messiah homecoming return in 2024 where like he's returning to take his rightful place in the White House that was stolen from him, and all the like the legal, like, it's the campaign to overthrow the results of the election, like, or overturn the results of the election, it's just been so incompetent and so evidence like free. But for certain parts of the country, and really interestingly, it's been the local Republicans that have had the biggest negative impact on Trump over these most recent 20 days, and the people in Washington have largely defended him, these Republican senators. But I don't know if this kind of mythology of this election was stolen is going to go away. And that's definitely going to have a huge effect for maybe closer elections to come. And the margin the Democrats are going to need to win is going to be not 4 points, but maybe 6 or 7.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, right? Because this was someone in the Obama administration who sort of specialized on like big data election modeling, right? In the current climate, right, the Democrats would need to win, I think, by 4 points nationally, right? Like 4.5 points in order to have a comfortable win in the Electoral College. But it's not enough to win in the Senate, right? The Democrats are so disadvantaged by the rural-urban sort of gap. It's like they really need to be more competitive, mainly with the demographic of working-class white people, if they really want any chance of holding all the keys to power But until then, the Democrats are going to be sort of this, majority minority party, right? It's very tough for them. They need to change their messaging.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you that like that's I mean, not necessarily the white world, but the path of like trying to bring working class people back into politics. Like that's the path that I think that like they should go on, and that's a path that I think a lot of people, or certain people in the Democratic Party today want them to go on. But I don't think it's a path that they're destined to go down. Though I don't think there's any indication that they're going to go down that path, and they're really going to try and keep their majority through flipping these culturally kind of not necessarily liberal, just like pro status quo people, like they did in the last election, and like that's how I think they're going to try and maintain their power.
I don't even know how cultural it is, to be honest, because these suburbanites, right, especially college-educated, wealthy suburbanites, it's not like they don't benefit from democratic policies, right? If you look at them wanting to subsidize higher education, right, the SALT deduction, that Biden actually wants to bring back, which is actually, if you are a progressive, it is terribly regressive, right? It primarily benefits the wealthiest people in blue states like New York who can deduct their state and local taxes, which are usually high. It's a big federal giveaway. Right? You see that Biden explicitly, I don't think he's going to be able to do this, granted, but he explicitly wants to bring that deduction back after Trump axed it.
And in the very key and intentional messaging of if your personal income is under $400,000, which is a pretty wide swath of people, your taxes will not go up. So like that's who that's targeting to, 400,000, and that number by the way just keeps going up over time for the Democrats. There's times where they said 100,000, 200,000, and they just keep raising it because that's who they want to bring into the coalition, and the people at the lower end of that income scale are who they want to push out.
Well, I don't know if they want to push them out, but it is just like it is by the nature of the seats they hold right now, right? Where these people are very wealthy, right? They're very privileged, right? Like the Democratic Party, I would argue, is the party of elites right now.
I think both parties are the party of elites, though.
I don't know. I think the Republican Party, like if we see more Hollies, right? I think we'll see it change.
But I don't think. I think a lot of that is. I don't think a lot of that is. Like really substantive though.
If you look at that, if you even look at Trump with the trade war, right? That is very like I don't think it certainly didn't benefit Wall Street, right? It didn't benefit Silicon Valley. It was very much sort of like what he personally believed this, right? A lot of Republicans believed this. To benefit and to revitalize sort of the working class industries, right, in manufacturing and in agriculture and in these other areas. And, maybe it was all just political posturing, right? But still, nonetheless, like if you look at, he's not posturing towards Wall Street or big tech or anything like that.
But yeah, I think there is something to be said for like the populist element of that trade war, and a big part of why that trade war didn't cost him more is because it didn't really benefit the farmers. Like a big part of why is because he passed that huge paycheck that he gave to farmers, which I think was like would really help, like kept a lot of that support closer, and he could have lost a lot more of it. But I don't like. I don't see the truth to the idea that like the GOP and people like Trump who originally, at least, and at the time where it mattered, at the time where he was actually doing policy and governance, his cabinet was stacked through and through with people like Steve Mnuchin and Gary Cohn and all these Wall Street people and a massive tax cut that was a giveaway to the wealthy. Like the Republican Party of the anti-Wall Street, the substantively anti-big tech Republican Party just does not exist in my view.
Maybe I should clarify what I'm saying. Well, if you look at, I think when you define working class, right, you define it with an economic definition, right? But I think there's also a very strong cultural aspect to it. With what you mentioned with the trade war, right? Trump intended it to help farmers because he wanted to open up more markets, right? He failed to do so. I agree, right? It hurt farmers a lot. But if you look in Iowa, right, and if you look at how these farmers voted, right, you didn't see them like vote based on their economic interest against Trump, right? You saw them vote in line with Trump and the Republicans. The Democrat got bumped, the Democratic senator, despite the trade war, despite the lowering soybean and corn
Mm.
prices and all of that. And I think it's very cultural, right? Because when Trump fights this trade war, it's not just, based on sort of the economic narrative, but it's also a very cultural narrative, I think. And it's very sort of anti-globalization, anti-elitism, right? So maybe, like, dude, maybe you're right. I personally disagree, right? But maybe you're right that, the Republicans still, like, economically, they very much favor wealthy people. But, culturally, they are really winning with their messaging right now.
Yeah, I definitely think that, especially like culturally, and in terms of there's just more non-college educated, or kind of the non-college class, I guess, is more electorally positioned to do better, and that definitely seems to, regardless of race, seems to be where the Republicans hold the strongest advantage all across the country
Yeah.
at the moment. And also the people who really just didn't turn out. For example, in like the Rio Grande Valley, down there in southern Texas, like there was like I think a 33 point something like that swing away in one of those counties from Biden to Clinton, from Clinton to Biden over those years, and like Biden still won, but it was like 5 points instead of like a huge massive amount. And that, like,
Yep.
just even the depression of the turnout and people saying, I don't want to participate in this election. I don't think any of the candidates are going to make a structural difference for me, is also another very prevalent trend.
What did you think about Obama's comments about evangelical Hispanics? And sort of like, because he's sort of like very much like, I know a lot of leftist people on Twitter sort of disagree with what he was saying there, but he's very much selling the cultural idea. Like, I think he's identified.
What were those?
Well, he was basically saying that there are a lot of Hispanics who like don't care about what Trump has said about Mexicans, right? About his sort of immigration and economic policies, right? But they very much vote on the Second Amendment, right, and abortion, right, because they're evangelicals, right, and they very much sort of culturally identify with sort of the more evangelical populations, the more evangelical population in the country, and yeah, he got a lot of heat for these comments, too.
I think, yeah. I mean, there was a lot more. I think there are probably a lot of other comments that he said are probably a little like more objectionable, and I'm sure there's some people, especially in Florida, that are like conservative Latinos, obviously, because more than any other like base of the country, like Latinos are a lot more like diverse ideologically, I'd say. And now I kind of sound like, I guess I kind of sound like Joe Biden now when he said something like that, but they're like, I also think it's because Joe Biden and the Democratic Party didn't offer them anything. Like, they weren't there, they weren't talking to them. And the biggest way that Bernie won with the Latinos so well, especially in the West of this country during the primaries, was that like he spent like months and months beforehand, like set up these offices and had these volunteers go out and like really talk to the kids, who would then kind of talk to the parents. It was really this kind of top-down organizing strategy of a political movement that actually cared about the Hispanic constituency, which Biden just didn't. He just didn't in this campaign, and I think a lot of other Democrats didn't, and that was, I think, another big thing that caused a lot of just apathy, and just kind of, they didn't hear the Biden message, and they didn't hear a Biden message that was tailored to them.
I think, yeah, a big reason is due to that. And I think a sort of the big issue for the leftists, right? And I think you can pretty much credit Bernie's victory in Nevada because of this, but it's unionization, right? And sort of the decline of unions, right? Because without unions, it removes the cultural incentives that go along with the economic incentives of supporting leftists. Right, and it goes with all of that, like class solidarity stuff, and all of that.
Yes, 100%.
Like, I don't think class politics is going to be effective for the Democrats if they want to win. Like, I get it. Like, if if you read Marx, right? If you're a college student and you read Marx, and you learn his analysis, and you look at the world through that lens, yeah, it'll work. Like the cultural lens, like you can see and you can vote based on that. But for most working class people, they don't have the time for that, right? Like, it's so cultural, I feel. But yeah,
I think it's a lot of that's like not by by accident of how union like the I think it's really interesting, something that I was thinking